district, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offer's the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden, they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man. Y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
Welcome, Fantasyland, to Quarter Milli Billies. Dan, we haven't done one of these in a while.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a while, but we had a decent team, and we found a way to tank it. So we haven't done it for a while. No, the injury gods found a way to tank our team. But we're back fresh, and we got a whole new contest to talk about and enter. So this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, man, this is tons. It's ton of whether your team, because I know sometimes your NFL team doesn't make it to this, to this part of the schedule in the NFL. So it's kind of fun to have something different to root for if you're not into DFS, and even if you're into DFS, man, like this tournament for me just makes the NFL playoffs that much better. And the FFPC, as you know, Dan, they've got two awesome tournaments. Last week, we had an awesome show. It was all about winning dynasty leagues. We celebrated some victories. Yeah. And, we had two awesome guests on. Go check it out if you haven't checked it out. If you're in Dynasty, if you're on the FFPC, there was this is one episode, Dan, I got to say, a lot of people reached out to me just saying how good they thought the episode was, how much good information they got out of it. And tonight's going to be no different. He was gracious enough to come on last year, and we got him back here for you guys this year. He is the 500,000 champion, the GOAT, the winner of the playoff challenge, the FFPC Playoff Challenge. And there he is. Look at that helmet, guys. Like, come on. That thing is sick.
That's fantastic.
That thing's a beauty, Austin. How are you, man? Thanks for coming on.
Unofficial, but I'm great. Thanks for having me on, guys. Good to be back.
Yeah, the pleasure is all ours, man. This is going to be a fun episode. I'm telling you. I'm just writing up the show sheet and everything. I'm like, yeah, this is going to be so much good strategy and everything. So
yeah. This is one of those where, it's for the people, but Dan and I are selfishly sitting here with our pens and papers. We're going to be entering both of the contests this year as the Quarter Milli Billies. And, we're hoping to follow your coattails, man. Like, give us some pointers, and build that perfect roster. So we got a lot to cover. Dan came up with some awesome, kind of a nice structure here with the way he positioned the question. So let's get right into it, if that's cool with you. We'll let's let the people know maybe what the tournament's about, Dan, before we kind of get into it. What I'll do is I'll throw the details up on the screen, and Dan, just remind the people if I know I've had a lot of people in the last couple of days that are new to the FFPC, and they're coming on specifically to play this tournament. So if you don't know about it, here are the details. Dan, I'll let you kind of outline that for people.
Okay, yeah. So there's these are basically two parallel contests. One is 200 to enter, the other is 35 to enter. The one that's 200 to enter has the $500,000 grand prize, the $500,000, and the $35 one has a $100,000 grand prize. And the prize structures are kind of completely different for them. The $500,000 is very top heavy. like second place is 50,000 rather than, something higher than that. So it's even more top heavy than like a lot of GPPs over in the DFS world. It's a little bit less top heavy on the $35 side. And that one's one that, but there's going to be a lot more teams in it. So it's kind of a weird situation where the prize is super top heavy for the 500,000, but the pay line runs further down. So a higher percentage of teams will cash it. Whereas the $35 one has a little bit more of a broad, where it declines a little bit more slowly on the pay structure, but it runs out a little bit quicker too, as long as you're talking about actual dollars. If you're talking about, like free credits and stuff like that, then it runs a little bit deeper too. But both of them are really great, and both of them are a lot of fun. I mean, once you start getting in there and making lineups, all you want to do is make more. I mean, that's my biggest problem with the tourney is like, I get in there and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do 3 lineups. And then I do those 3 and I'm like, oh man, I got to do 3 more. I got to do 3 more. I got to do 3 more. It keeps going and going. And so what you do is you got to pick from each playoff team. There are 14 playoff teams. You're going to pick 12 players. You can only have 1 player from each team, right? So you've got 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, a defense, and a kicker, and then 4 flex spots that can be running back, wide receiver, or tight end. And so you've got to figure out, first off, okay, there's going to be 2 teams that you're going to completely fade because you only have a 12-player roster. And then you have to also have, start to figure out, well, I can't play Kelsey and Mahomes both, so you're going to have to figure out, is it better for me to play Kelsey or better for me to play Mahomes? So a lot of good stuff like that, that makes it really interesting. And it means that you can have all these people involved in the contest. And it's really not that difficult to come up with a unique roster. We're going to help you do that. And one of the things we really want to do today is we want to help people who are just going to put in, like 1 or 2 or maybe a handful of entries. Not, if you're going to enter it 50 times or whatever, you probably don't need our help. Let's be honest. You probably already got figured out, and good for you. But
unless you don't cash at all on those 50 entries, then you might need our help.
Yeah, and then next year you'll definitely want our help. But you don't have to put in a ton of entries. Austin, how many did you put in last year?
We did 10 last year.
Yeah, so there you go. 10 entries.
There's definitely a lot of players that did more for sure. There's a lot of people that just do 1 or 2.
Yep.
Fire it off and see what happens. But we did 10. We were settled on 8, and then we kind of, Seth and I talked a little bit more, and on Saturday morning we decided to fire off a couple more that were just, just slight iterations of what we had already put together. And it was the 10th team that ended up shipping it. So
no way. Now Dan can put in like 5,000 teams, because every time he thinks of that's what happened, right? You were thinking about those last minute adjustments, those last second tweaks on the lines you probably already had, or were they totally different than what you had already?
No, I mean, we had basically the same core. We had 2 different players, really. It was we were really heavy on Bills, so we decided to just do kind of 1 hedge team with Hopkins, because I was really sold on the Bills last year. I thought they were going to steamroll the Texans, and that's how the game kind of started. But, Seth and I were talking, and he wasn't as convinced. So he said, okay, well, we'll do, Hopkins can go nuts, and even in 1 game. So we decided we'd do 1 team with Hopkins, and we put Metcalf on that team as well, where the rest of them had Lockett. So, it was really just kind of those 2 small pivots from another team that we had already in the contest. The other team did well. I think it might have even shipped a free main event entry, but that's a far cry from $500,000.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and just to let people know, there are 6,250 spots in the $200 entry, and about 2/3 of those are gone right now. And there are 12,500 spots in the $35 entry, and about, again, 2/3 of those are gone right now. So this thing is moving fast. It is absolutely going to sell out. It's absolutely going to sell out early. Don't wait until Saturday morning to decide, oh, hey, I think it might be a nice idea to put in a team. Even if you're not sure what your team is, go ahead and get registered. If you want to put in 3, 4, 5 teams, whatever, register for that many teams and get those spots guaranteed to yourself. And then if you go back and you start building lineups and there's, you see, hey, I'd like to do a couple more and there's still spots left, go ahead and get those couple more. But, whatever the minimum number is you want to put in, make sure you get those right away. I'd get them tonight or tomorrow at the latest. So, I think. And Dan,
for that reason, I'm going to cut you off. For that reason, I'm cutting you off, Dan, because as you know, we've had our contest going for the past week or past month and a half, about, I'd say maybe 6 weeks we ran it. So we've got some entries. Basically, if anyone tagged us on a picture of them wearing any GOAT gear on Twitter, they got an entry into this contest. So first, actually, I'll start with the second prize, which is the $35 entry. And thank you to the FFPC and Alex for providing these prizes for the contest. That's very generous. We appreciate it. Our boy Gymnastic at Gold Jackets QB over there at TNF, True North Fantasy Football. He's always given us great feedback, Dan, and retweeting our stuff. And he's been very supportive of the show. I know he's been listening for a while. So nice to see him win an entry into this tournament. And the grand prize winner, who actually ordered the special Always Be Trading aqua-ish type of T-shirt that my wife picked the color for. She'll be happy to know that. At SlickWick13. So congrats to SlickWick13. You just won a $200 entry and a chance to win $500,000, my friend. So I hope you're listening right now. We said this contest was for subscribers and listeners, but we get world is hectic. We're back to work and stuff. So Dan and I, we'll tweet it out anyways. We'll eventually tweet out the winners. But if you're listening right now, get out there. Like Dan said, this thing is selling out quick. I know the FFPC, I got an email this morning saying it was more than half full. Dan, you had the exact numbers there. But anyways, I'll hand it back to you. I just wanted to get back to that. So if anyone's listening that won, run over there and start filling in that roster.
Yeah, so I think that pretty well explains the contest and what's going on. So again, get your entries in there. And JD, I'll flip it right back to you. Let you kind of talk to Austin a little bit about his what happened last year, what his process was, and everything else. Yeah,
and again, I always say, I want to know, how does it feel? Like, how does that feel, man, to win 500? I have no idea. I want to know what it feels like before I get into the strategy stuff and all that. I want to know, man, how does it feel when you guys finally, when you knew, maybe it was before it was even over, you realized you guys were going to win this thing? How did that feel, man?
I mean, it was crazy. It's really hard to even, winning a contest like that with that many entries is, the odds are stacked against you. You don't go into a contest like that thinking you're necessarily going to have a chance even. And, we pretty much figured that after the first set of games that we were pretty much toast. We had one live entry that didn't have Bills on it. I mean, we had the Bills D. We had one live entry and that team didn't have Delvin Cook. So, we kind of moved on to the second contest that FFPC puts together and threw a few entries in there and said, maybe we'll have a shot at this other, little 50K prize over here. And, as the contest kind of moved on, and obviously after Mostert went crazy against Green Bay, we knew we had a real chance. But yeah, it's wild. It's still hard to believe. It's a long time ago now. But here we are again. So
especially after the year we just survived, right? It seems even longer.
What a year! Yeah. What a grind! Yeah, it's incredible. So this year is going to be even more interesting. I'm just praying, we can put some teams together and set it and forget it, and not have to deal with COVID and players missing. And that's my biggest fear with this contest this year is things just getting out of hand and luck being even. You have to get lucky to win a contest like this, right? You have to get lucky, and we got lucky. I mean, Tevin Coleman got dinged up, Mostert would have never probably scored 4 touchdowns. That doesn't happen. So you have to catch some breaks, but you just hate to see it happen in a way where it's, you know, a guy's testing positive for COVID and all the nonsense. So you just hate to see it happen that way. So knock on wood, you know, we can get a clean few weeks, but tough to bank on.
So why don't we just sit here for a second, just because we've brought it up, is how is that going to affect your lineup decisions moving? Like, are you approaching it any differently because of COVID? You know, because it's different than the season, right? Where you got to set your lineups and all that. So how is COVID going to affect you setting up lineups, if at all?
I mean, I think it depends how many teams you build, as far as, you know, how far down the line you go from. You know, you pick your optimal lineup, what you think is the best lineup that has the highest chance to score the most points. That's going to be a common lineup. Like, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to have a very similar lineup or just, you know, one pivot here or there. So I think the COVID factor, I think, you know, as you start building teams, especially if you're doing more teams, you know, I found myself after building a number of teams, like, at some point we have to get off of the best plays a little bit and take some chances, because the likelihood of one player outscoring the other is not consistent with the ownership. And so, you know, that's really that was our strategy last year with the contest with Mostert versus Kittle. You know, you got 7-1 ownership. Is Kittle 7-1 more likely to outscore him? I don't think so. Probably not. So I think that's what you kind of have to look at. And now you add in the randomness, and, you know, you probably cut those chances in half as far as, you know, comparing two comparable players.
And the randomness and the luck is what makes it attractive to the masses, right? It's kind of like the poker thing, right? You could sit down with Phil Ivey, but that luck factor gives you an edge to possibly win. And I like the way you position that with regards to the chances of it happening and the ownership difference between certain players on the same team.
Yeah.
Like Mahomes and Kelsey, right?
Yeah. I mean, Kelsey's going to probably be, you know, if not the most heavily owned, he'll be top 3 for sure. It's probably going to come in somewhere close to what Kittle was at last year. And so, yeah, you have to look at that and make some decisions. I mean, is Kelsey the best tight end play? I don't think there's many questions about that. Is he the best play? I don't know. We'll see.
So when you're mapping out your rosters, like, give us a feel of what's your basic approach. And are you kind of like you and I was asking you, like, do you know a good site to get a nice bracket so I can get a visual on exactly how this can play out? Is that something you're looking at? Like, are you playing out the brackets before you fill out your lineups and you kind of line it up that way with your ownership on each team? Or what is your general approach when you're...
Well, I put together a bracket. I do map it all out and see, you know, what's that all going to look like, because there's reseeding in the NFL playoffs. So I don't think reseeding is going to, you know, not to give too much away, but I don't think reseeding is going to be a big factor this year. Looking at the playoffs, it seems like it's going to be pretty chalky. That's at first glance. I don't think you need to, like, look at, you know, if this team beats this team, they're going to, you know, the reseeding is going to change the matchup, and that's going to drastically change the way that you pick players. I don't think that's really going to be a factor. But I definitely map it all out, see, you know, which teams I have playing the most games. You want the best players from the Super Bowl, and kind of walk it back and, you know, reverse engineer it that way. So I don't think it's too different from the way that most people, you know, any somewhat savvy players kind of handle a contest like this. You kind of have to start at the Super Bowl and go backwards and then fill it in. And then you figure out the wild card games. Who's going to win? You kind of need to get that mostly right. I mean, last year we didn't. We weren't 100%. 3 out of 4. I think we had Bailey. You know, they pulled out the W against the Saints, but you know, I don't think you're not putting yourself in a great position if you're not picking players from the winning teams in those wildcard games. You need to get the fades right, and you want to have defense and kicker as two of those other teams that are going to be losing. So, that's kind of the approach. I don't think it's anything too advanced or anything unique that anyone else isn't doing. It's just picking the right players.
Yeah, you're almost picking like the bottom 4 teams, right? For the 2 that you're not going to use, and then I think Pat Crane or one of them I heard earlier say like it's like kind of your soft fade, your kicker and your defense. Is that kind of how you're not picking?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. You absolutely. You pick the kicker and defense, and you're expecting those teams to lose. I mean, if you're not doing that, you're definitely doing it wrong. Yeah. Maybe you shouldn't make too many assumptions, but I mean, that's the way that you have to approach that. If you're thinking anything else, it's probably not a great strategy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you do just like basically one run through the playoffs, and this is kind of how I think it's going to fall, and then base most or all of your teams off of that, or do you do several different variations of how the playoffs might fall, and then do teams based on each of those different iterations?
I think it kind of depends on the certain matchups. I don't have a hard and fast set rule on that necessarily, but for the most part, especially when we did 10 teams this year, we're probably going to do a few more. But if you're limiting yourself to a reasonable amount of teams, for normal people, you're probably going to want to kind of stick to a core of those teams that you have advancing, playing the most games. You have to take a hard position at some point. You can't just, think you're going to find a spot for your favorite player on every team. Like, it just doesn't work that way. I mean, unless you want to cap the contest out, but I don't think that's, I'm not going to say whether that's a good idea or not.
Well, I think we know where you're going on that, but so you mostly just try to stick with a single, iteration of the playoffs and say, this is how I think it's going to go, with maybe just like if you're not sure on 1 or 2 games, you may do different lineups based on, okay, well, if this particular way happens, then we'll do this. And if the other way happens, then we'll do it the other way.
Yeah, last year, for example, I was really confident in the Bills. The first 8 teams I built, I had 100% Bills. I had either Josh Allen or Smokey Brown. And then, on one of the last 2 teams, we decided to do Hopkins because, Seth kind of shook some sense into me and said that was going to be a ball game. And it sure turned out to be. So, that worked out. But we took a hard position against the Patriots. We were full fade. We're 90% on the Patriots. So we sent it in 90% with King Henry. And we were also, I think we faded the Eagles 90% as well. Just put one team in with Ertz. So, if you're building any quantity of teams, especially anyone that's into DFS is, they're building hedge teams when they're doing a volume. And that's kind of how this worked out. The hedge team ended up shipping it all.
Nice.
Other than listening to the GOAT District, obviously, what are some resources that you find valuable or that you found valuable that you're still using? And is there something specific like stats wise or projection wise or that you look for or that you maybe put together yourself going into these to help you?
I don't sub to any like season long sites anymore. For a lot of years I did. Finally just got to a point where I started to trust my eyes, and if you're on Twitter, you're getting all the information, and you process it yourself. If you're not watching enough of the games, by all means, find someone that you trust. And actually, let me walk that back, because about a week before the season this year, I subbed to my boy Nelson and his mentorship program at Number Ball. So I'm going to shout him out right there. And, full transparency. But for the most part, I like to trust my eyes and what I see and make my own evaluations. And, you know, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
So that you said that was what, number boss?
Number ball.
Number ball. Okay.
Yep. That's Nelson Sousa at the franchise 12, I believe, on Twitter.
Yep. So I like to, you know, I did it specifically in that way because I wanted to trust myself through the draft process, building teams. But he's really sharp with, you know, fab and keying in on, you know, what are the appropriate bids each week, how to prioritize those. So, you know, that was something I found pretty useful. Not in the sense of a playoff contest, but just kind of season-long management.
Yeah, no, that's actually good to know, because that's those are little details that you don't find help with everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Is there something that you're talking about this tournament a lot? You've won. So you're probably getting a feel for what some people are doing. Is there a mistake that you're seeing people make, like a common mistake that you can think of?
I mean, I think that the biggest takeaway is, you know, people are just, it's so easy to just look at what do these players do during the regular season and just assume that that's going to just transfer right over. And I think that's the biggest mistake. I mean, if you look at the team that we won with, you know, we pivoted off of basically, other than Hopkins and Henry, we pivoted off of the next 5 highest owned players. And when you look at it, you're comparing players that are true studs. I mean, you're comparing Kamara and Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams and Aaron Jones. The likelihood of one of these players significantly outproducing the other is not great. I mean, these are closer to coin flips than you think. So I think that's the biggest thing, is to look at it and say, you know, we're looking at a short window here, 3 or 4 games, right? And so you're not, you know, it's a smaller sample and anything can happen in that short period of time. So, you know, again, it goes back to looking at the ownership versus the likelihood of one player out producing the other. And in these contests, I think people, especially if you're doing, you know, the people doing 1 or 2 teams, definitely just get locked into kind of a chalky build. And if you're doing 1 or 2 teams, you really gotta take some stands. I mean, the likelihood of shipping it with a bunch of chalk on one team, it's not great.
Right. And you're probably going to be sharing that prize with, you know, 35 other people or whatever too.
Yeah.
Yes, that's another great point. Yeah. And these are all little tidbits, like, are very important. I like the one thing that I took real note of is when you and Dan were discussing the fact that you chose one path with regards to the playoff outcomes, and that's what you followed for all of them. Because I'm just thinking of myself in the past when I've entered multiple teams, I kind of did the opposite. I put out maybe 2 or 3 different outcomes, and then I kind of build different teams based on that. But I kind of like that, because again, you're going back to trusting yourself and your instincts, right? As opposed to you just making it like a lottery and like a game.
It definitely depends on the quantity of teams. You know, once you get over a certain threshold, like, you can start to say, you know, maybe that's 10. You know, I guess it was for us 10. You know, we had 10 Buffalo teams, and we decided, we'll fire off in case I'm wrong.
I love that. I love that it was your last roster, though.
You know, but
awesome.
you know, I think that's a reasonable number. And then now, you know, we've got 2 additional flex spots this year. So I kind of, just from my preliminary, like, building teams, I think that threshold is higher. Like, I think you have to be building more teams to be getting more off of, you know, what you're predicting the outcome to be. If you don't think the Rams stand a chance to beat Seattle, you probably shouldn't be firing up Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods and Cam Akers. You think they're live, you know, put them in there, because they're going to be low owned.
Don't sleep on my Colts. I got one more for you, Austin. Player ownership, similar to DFS, is very important when you're looking at this tournament. Is that something you do yourself, or is that like a third-party thing that you've got a source? I know you kind of touched on where you're getting your sources from, but is that something you're trusting your gut on, or how do you approach that?
I owe my buddy Nelson a follow-up call. We talked a little bit earlier this afternoon about ownership, and then things got away from me this afternoon. So, I mean, I have some ideas. I like, I have a few people that I'm pretty close with that I bounce ideas off. My partner, Seth, Nelson, Hubbard, you guys, you know the crew that I generally converse with, and I think they're pretty sharp and keep me on my toes. So, I think it's important to trust yourself, but it's also good to have just a small group of people that you trust, that you can bounce ideas off of, that will shoot you straight. Because sometimes we get a little bit, galaxy brain and start thinking a little crazy and wanting to go out on a limb. And sometimes that's okay. But sometimes you need to dial it back in a little bit too.
Right. Yeah, definitely. You got to focus your narrative back, and keep just building towards that one same story that you're telling yourself.
Dan, before we continue, I'll pass it to you when we get back. But just to remind people, we're talking about these tournaments. Look, this will apply if you're in a lot of different playoff challenges. That's kind of why in the title I hesitated. Should I put FFPC specifically? I mean, they're obviously a big supporter of the show, and this is specific to that tournament. But I'm sure you can pick a lot of this information if you're playing, sometimes just with your friends. I know in the GOAT leagues we had someone kind of start a playoff tournament, but if you want to join in on the FFPC, like we said, it's over half full right now in these tournaments. Go to myffpc.com. If you don't already have an account there and you're new, you're making a first deposit to get in these tournaments, just reach out to me, DM at GOAT District, and then I'll hook you up with a exclusive sign-up bonus. You get a credit that you can use towards whatever you want, Dynasty, best ball, anything else that you're able to play on the tournament. But honestly, Dan and I, again, we talk about it. We have guys like Austin on here to talk about these tournaments because we're playing these tournaments. Like, we like playing these tournaments. They're fun. You can win a shit ton of money, and Austin's a perfect example of that. And I don't know, Austin, if you're like I'm thinking in French right now, a menuisier, like a guy who works wood, but the woodsmanship behind you is like insane, dude. I'm looking at that ceiling, and I'm like, holy crap, man.
Anything about any of it.
No, it looks awesome, dude. I'm just looking back, and I keep looking. I'm like, that looks pretty cool. But
filter. No.
That's a filter. Nice, like Dan. He's got the green screen like Dan. So yeah, check out myffpc.com. Whether you want to sign up and start looking at dynasties on there. They've got best balls that are going to be coming up real soon, right, Dan? We'll be signing up for those 101 AJB. Curious to see who Dan's going to throw up there this year with the 101. But yeah, man, at myffpc, we'll hook you up. Reach out to me at GOAT District. Shoot me DM, and I'll get you a credit when you put your first deposit in there. Dan, pass to you, brother.
All right. Yeah. So, Austin was saying, of course, he's got sharp friends that he can bounce things off of, and that's fantastic. Not everybody has as many sharp friends as Austin. So we got a few resources for you that'll help you out a little bit as you're working on putting together these challenge rosters. So, first off, I know, Austin, you were on the Draft Sharks pod last night, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How to find that? Is that behind a paywall or anything, or is that something that they should be able to access, or do you know?
You should be able to pull that up. Yeah. Let's see. It was I tweeted it out. Adam tweeted it out. I retweeted it a couple times. So Adam Krautwurst and Mike Shop, if I'm not saying that wrong.
Yep.
Adam _Krautwurst. And you should be able to look that up. Otherwise, I retweeted it last night, so check it out. But
so just check your Twitter feed.
Behind any paywall.
Okay, great. That's fantastic. And then we kind of alluded to Pat Corain. He does the playoff challenge is one of his favorite things. If you spend any time talking to Pat, he loves the playoff challenge. He and Peter Overzet do a show called Ship Chasing. You can find that out on YouTube. Just search Ship Chasing on YouTube. They had one pod out already that they did, I think it was 2 nights ago, and it was fantastic. A really good overview of the contest and just kind of general talk through all the different playoff teams. And, what sorts of things you might want to consider as you're thinking about these teams as far as who to play and who to not play. And they'll be doing more recording throughout the week. I know they're going to have Hassan Rahim and Blair Andrews on probably tonight, and be putting that out there as well. RotoViz has a lot of good content. Sean Siegel does RotoViz Overtime, and he does a really good yearly breakdown on the strategy. I always like listening to that because he kind of comes at it from a different way than I think of it a lot of times. And so it's just kind of one of those things where it's like he jogs me to go at it a little bit different and gives me a couple of good ideas usually. And then there'll be some sites on the article too. So if you're a RotoViz subscriber, you can just check in there. And then also Establish the Run has lots of good stuff. Pat Crane writes there. He does his ownership projections and puts them on that site, and you can find player projections there as well. So it's a really good place to start. 4 for 4, going to have lots of projections and strategy content later this week. So, if you're a sub there, that's a good spot. And then a last spot that's also a favorite of mine, Darren Amani's FantasyMojo.com has a lot of great content, okay? He's got historical ownership percentages. He's got some strategy stuff. He's even got a downloadable lineup optimizer. I mean, it's like $5 to get on FantasyMojo.com. It's cheap. And he's got great stuff. So if you're looking for the discount way to get into some real goodness, I definitely recommend that as well. So those are some good places where you can find some great resources to help you out beyond what you're getting here. But we just want to make sure that we want to see some goats up in the top of that pay structure. So make sure you check those guys out. And if you listen to this pod and you do well, make sure you let people know as well.
Yeah, for sure. Tag us.
Yes, we'd love to get you on like we had Austin on last year.
For sure.
All right, so let's kind of dive into some of the deeper strategy a little bit while we got time. I think we kind of talked about the very basics of the contest and kind of the broad overview of how you put your team together and all that. But I think there's a lot of little things that you can do as well. And one of the things I still find it funny that, Austin, you and Seth didn't really start fast on the team that ended up winning, but a lot of times in these contests, that's so key. Like you said, you were a little bit bummed out because you guys didn't start fast on any of your teams. And so you're like, oh, let's move on to something different.
Yeah, it was. I said after the Bills lost, we had one non-Bills team, and we didn't have Delvin, so I kind of like mentally wrote it off. I actually apologized to Seth for taking such a hard
I do that to Dan sometimes.
Sorry, I spent all your money, Seth.
Yeah, sorry, man. I didn't. We punted off $2,000, and my bad.
Yep.
Get back after it in the fall, next summer, whatever. So, but yeah, I was at my parents' place watching the first half of the Packers-Niners game. And, we had Mostert and Tevin Coleman scored 2 touchdowns in the previous game. So obviously we were way behind the ball. Mostert comes out, a couple of real explosive runs, scores. I forget if he scored 1 or 2 touchdowns in the first half. Didn't really think anything of it. Went home. Girls took a nap. Mommy and Daddy took a nap. All of a sudden, I hear my phone buzzing, and it's Hubbard, and he says, "I see you up top, looking good." What? Pick up my phone. Mostert's got 4 touchdowns, and I'm in first place. Came from like 400 back. What's going on here? And obviously, that got my attention. I was very interested. I couldn't wait for my wife to wake up, and I was plotting, trying to figure out how much to tell her. Right?
That's awesome.
We just kind of
we laugh because we've been there.
Yeah, I mean,
not for that much money, but yeah,
you don't want
5,000. I never heard of 5,000. It was 2,000. What are you talking about?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was pretty interesting time. I remember it quite vividly. So it was pretty interesting. Yeah, we started slow. Adams went off in that game as well. He had a real long reception that I remember being pretty big that kind of separated us from some of the other Aaron Jones teams. So, you definitely want to get off to a fast start. I mean, from experience, I can tell you don't have to. You're not dead, but it's hard to imagine yourself moving 400 spots up the leaderboard, after the first week of games. Like, it takes quite a bit for that to happen. So, yeah, you got to pick some players with low ownership, and Mostert, I think, was at 11%. So, that'll do it. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the interesting things about it, too, is that when you think about it, you're going to, almost every team is going to have some chalk and some low-owned guys, right? So the place where you're most likely to be different from other teams is going to be early in the contest, as teams get, or as NFL teams get eliminated and, so players drop off, that team that you have right now that has 12 players on it, by the time you get to week number 2, you're for sure going to be losing 4 players off of that, right? Because you got, just by definition, you're going to be down to 8 players from 12. And the odds of those 8 players being similar to somebody else's 8 players is a lot higher than your 12 players being similar to somebody else's 12 players. So, to me, it's like you really want to get out to that early lead, because once your team becomes the same as somebody else at some point during the contest, they can never catch you and you can never catch them. So you want to, your goal is, whatever, however many teams end up being in your same pool, in each round of the playoffs, you want to be the top scorer in that pool of teams that have identical players. And hopefully you started out unique so that you can get yourself into that pole position. Does that make sense?
Makes plenty of sense. It takes quite a confluence of events to be able to run down, hundreds of teams in that scenario. It has to be obviously a timeshare running back type situation, or a 1v1 couple receivers. There's just not that many ways to get there if you're starting that far behind. So, I think you want to be up there after the first week, to feel good about it. Unless you're just on some obscure players that that have that first round bye, and now we only have two first round buys, so right. That's a different dynamic too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, just 2 things that you touched on that I found interesting is, one, you're never out of it, and that's kind of that's the addictive thing, right? Like, Dan, you're saying it's nice to get ahead, but Austin, how much more fun is it to come from behind, like out of nowhere? You know what I mean?
I mean, that was wild. I figured we maybe had a team that had a chance to, get its money back, maybe a little bit more. Maybe we, they give out some main event entries and you can kind of recoup your investment that way. And that's kind of what I thought we were looking at, It would have felt pretty good about it. But right. Yeah, it is. Sure, it is definitely quite a thrill to watch a team ascend the leaderboard, though. Admittedly, I kind of took a nap and woke up and realized what was happening. That was like, I don't take naps during football. It's where I thought we were at with that, with that contest.
Because you went to sleep, you're like, it's over, right?
Yeah, whatever. There's nothing really to see here. So,
but that's so much. That had so much more to the story. It's like I was telling Dan last week when I took down a dynasty on the FFPC. Same thing. I had Adams and Diggs, but the guy who had Kamara went off, and he went from like 4th to like 1st. I was like, there's no way this guy's got it, right? Maybe I'm getting 2nd. I hung out with the wife, turned off all the football stuff. Late at night, everybody goes to bed. I'm like, all right, I'll watch the game. And I was like, what? Adams just went off, and then I had a chance with Diggs. And then all of a sudden I'm like, holy shit, I'm going to win,
Yeah. We had a couple similar scenarios. We had a super flex 750 team that we were 70 plus points back with Josh Allen and Diggs and got there. It was incredible.
My new favorite player, you.
Well, yeah, and like I'm looking, last year the top 7 teams all had Mahomes and Mostert, right? Who are and since you can only have one player per team, those were the guys that, like, if you'd been behind any of those teams before the last week, you could have never caught them, right? So you had to be the top scorer amongst those. That's why every position counts.
Oh yeah.
And if you can just scrape out a few more points out of this position or that position, because when you're the number one, at whatever point your lineups are converged, then all you have to worry about is those people who are coming in with a different combination than what you have, like Kelsey and Mostert or something like that. That was the only chance anybody had to dethrone you at that point, right?
Yeah, I think, you definitely have to. It's all that much more important to look at every game. You have to figure out who the winners and losers are and pick your team accordingly. You get that wrong, and the odds are stacked against you. You can do it if you miss on maybe one, but if you get more than one of the full fades or one of the half fades, if you want to call it that, with the kicker and defense, you get more than one of those wrong, I don't think you really have much of a chance, and you might have to just get them all right this year.
Yeah.
With the additional flex spots. So, yeah, every point counts. We were 8 points off the optimal, I guess. We couldn't land on Darren Fells last year. So
hilarious.
Come on, Austin. How come?
Those Houston tight ends, man. Jeez, especially in a tight end preem, they're frustrating.
Oh yeah.
And last year they were definitely there was a lot of value in them, but you just had to know which one to be on. So,
or just be lucky to be on them.
Right. Exactly.
So recency bias is a huge thing, as we know, in fantasy. And like, how do you use that to your advantage? Did you incorporate that last year? Do you see that this year, where recency bias might be something that you can take advantage of and give you that slight difference in your roster?
I think, definitely. And I think you could kind of see it with, when you're dealing with two superstars, especially, it's kind of alarming how heavy the chalk got. Like, everyone was on Aaron Jones. Everyone was on Michael Thomas. I mean, Kamara and Adams went not unowned, but I'd have to look at the percentages again. But you're talking about like 3 or 4 to 1.
Which there shouldn't be much of a difference.
Yeah, I mean, on players where it's like a 60-40, 60-40, 70-30 at the very, very worst. When you're talking about these types of players in a short sample, 1, 2, 3, at the most 4 games, anything can really happen in that short window. So, I think it's real, and I think you'll see it again. We're trying to use that to our advantage to build some teams that are maybe just a little bit different. We find ourselves falling into that trap as well. So it's tough to balance, but it's what makes it fun, right?
Yep, exactly. I mean, it's one of those things where, you can look at it and say, well, it seems like Tyler Lockett hasn't had that many big games, and so I should probably go DK Metcalf, and so Metcalf is probably going to have at least triple the ownership of Lockett, maybe even more than that. It might be quintuple or something like that. But the other thing is, if you think Seattle might be, playing 1 or at most 2 games, and Lockett has 1 huge game out of that, that's a place where you can use that recency bias, to help you out. And, while everybody else is going, I'd rather have DK Metcalf because he did so much better during the second half of the season than Lockett. But you take Lockett and he has that 1 big game, you're in great shape. Hey,
he's showing a 50-point ceiling.
Right.
So, there's no reason that it should be 3 to 1. Yep. I think they should be pretty close. When you look at it, if you're considering everything, I think they should be a lot closer than what it will be, for sure.
Right. Yep, exactly. And that's kind of how you want to make that recency bias work, is just kind of find those edges like that where you can, you can play somebody that's going to be lower owned and come out with as many points or more, just because everybody else is so focused on what happened last week or the past 2 or 3 weeks or whatever.
What a coaching matchup, though, in that Seattle, LA. Actually, the whole NFC. I look at every matchup, and it's like a chess. It's going to be like a chess master tournament. With actually, the AFC is not that much different, to be honest. It's going to be a fun playoff, and like we said, these tournaments make it that much funner. How do you decide on fades? Like, are there guys that you think are fades going in? I mean, not, you don't want to give all your secrets, but is there a way that you can, help the fishermen fish, I guess you could say, with regards to identifying fades, or is it just the ownership, or is there something else that you're adding to the equation?
I mean, it comes down to the individual and how many teams you're building to figure out, how hard of a stance you want to take. But it's, it starts with, again, looking at the bracket and seeing who do you have advancing. The teams that you have losing, that's where you start. So those are your fades. As far as looking at teams that you think are going to advance and what the ownership looks like, I mean, what's Kelsey going to come in at? 60, 70%?
It's going to be a lot.
It's going to be a lot, man.
Tight end was kind of a wasteland, And if the Ravens hadn't gotten in, he'd have probably been, he would have been for sure 70%. He might not hit that, but it'll be close. But again, is there any reason that Tyreek should be 10 to 15% ownership and Kelsey should be 70? Mm-hmm. You're telling me that there's a 5-to-1 plus better chance that Kelsey's going to outscore Tyreek. And yeah, I understand position scarcity and all that, but you can. There's a few tight end options. You don't have to use Kelsey, but he's going to be by far and away the most heavily owned. I don't think there's any question about that.
Right.
Amongst tight ends, it's not going to be even remotely close. But he's likely to be one of he's for sure going to probably be a top 3 owned player in the tournament. If not, 1 or 2. We'll see about Kamara and the news that will probably come out in the next few days. So,
and it's not like you're pivoting to like Hardman or Emmanuel Sanders. Not that you can't do that. I'm just saying your example,
you're talking about
he's a top receiver,
super elite receiver on a great team with the best quarterback, and he's going to come in as a contrarian play, like
same ceiling, like similar ceiling, right?
Yeah, some of that. Yeah. I mean, if you can look at it, and the matchups probably aren't going to be great, but if he gets to the Super Bowl, if the Chiefs get to the Super Bowl, I probably want Tyreek at 10 to 15% instead of Kelsey at 60 to 70. I'm going to have more Kelsey teams than Tyreek teams, I'll tell you that. But again, I'm going to have some Tyreek for sure.
Yeah, it just makes sense. Again, because you're just when you have a player that's at 15% ownership, the number of people that are likely to have the same exact lineup as you once you get to that championship week is going to be a lot fewer. I mean, just by definition, there's going to be a lot more Kelsey teams than Tyreek teams. In that last week, and so it makes it easier to win the whole thing. And the other thing is, I think, tell me what you think about this, Austin, but I think with these extra 2 flex spots, it makes it a little bit easier if you decide, I want to totally fade tight end. And, given the fact that there's basically, one super good option, one kind of good option with Andrews, and then, a bunch of options, maybe you can talk yourself into Gronk, but or Tanyan or something like that, but then look at who you're foregoing to take those guys, so it's like, I think with those extra flex spots, you can say, you know what, I'm only going to start one tight end, and I don't care if it's one of the higher owned guys. I'm going to pack those flexes with players who I think are going to be high scoring and lower owned instead of trying to jam a Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews in there. What do you think about that, Austin?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, more players, there's more opportunity to make mistakes and gain leverage and all of that. So I think it makes the tournament harder. I would have felt better with 2 less flex spots, but I understand. I understand why they did it, but I think it would have been easier to manage, especially, with fewer teams, without those extra flex spots. So, can KC play one game? Could they be one and done? Sure, they could. I mean, they've sputtered a little bit down the stretch. The defense is not great. They've not been able to run the ball.
And they will be playing the Colts there, Austin. So.
How important is that? Yeah, I mean, they could be playing the Colts, and we'll see.
Colts fans, they're guaranteed to be playing the Colts. We'll just put it that way.
If you fade Kelsey and you get tight end right, I mean that you are way ahead of the field.
Smashing on Jonnu, just smashing Jonnu.
I mean, yeah, you find yourself in a great spot. So we'll definitely be doing it. At the same time, Kelsey goes nuts. It's going to be really hard to win without him. So it's not
when you bust out the Mostert secret weapon, the 4 touchdowns.
It always comes back to how many teams you're building and how you're approaching it that way. I think, if you're not building very many teams, I think you should probably fade Kelsey. Unless you just like being live, like feeling like you're live, like out of the gate, like, false hope and all that. But I mean, because your hopes can be pretty quickly dashed when Kelsey, scores 2 or 3 touchdowns and goes 10 for $150 and 3. It's like you're probably not live without him. So that's the tough decision. But again, that's why we do these contests.
Yeah, I think if you're throwing in even 3 or 4 entries, it's probably good to be on both sides of that Kelsey coin for sure.
Yeah.
Does playoff experience play a factor for you when you're looking at the teams? I mean, we're looking. You've got the Browns haven't been there forever. And Dan, am I the only one that feels like we're interviewing Baker Mayfield here? Like
Or right. Baker sweatshirt last night. No, I think current form is more important than experience.
Yeah. Me. Like you mean rolling into the playoffs, like momentum, that kind of thing?
Yeah, like, you look at Brady and he looked washed mid-season, early season. Mm-hmm. He's kind of turning it on now.
Typical Brady.
So do I like Brady or do I like Tampa? I mean, I actually kind of like Washington. I like their defense a lot. I'd really like to see them win. I'd like to jam a couple WFT players in there. the football team. But Brady's rounding into form. They're looking better. But so am I picking Brady based on experience? No, it's just current form. I think I'm not too concerned about historical trends when it comes to the playoffs. For purposes of playing this contest, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you don't worry about quarterback being kind of a deer in the headlights type thing, because it's their first time in the playoffs or anything like that. Possibly tanking the whole team.
They're not facing Belichick, Dan. So those young quarterbacks.
I mean, I think you just kind of look at the player pool and the teams that you have advancing, and if you're looking at the higher seeds, this year especially. So you've got obviously Mahomes has done it, Rodgers has done it, Lamar and Josh Allen have had their bumps in the road, right? But but they are both peaking and looking real good right now. So I'm not too worried about their struggles in the playoffs last year. I mean, could that come back and surface itself and you say, shit, I should have saw this coming? Josh Allen's awful in the playoffs last year. I mean, some of those throws and the decision making was really bad.
Yeah, he definitely brought Houston back into the game.
He's a different player. He's a totally different player this year. Yep. So, I just I look at current form and kind of just try and block out all the noise.
Right.
And just think, you were saying you were smashing Buffalo with John Brown. now look at who they have as a weapon. What a difference. You know, it's like a whole new level.
Yeah. Top 5.
Yeah.
Big.
Yep. Yeah, that's still a little bit of a sore subject here in Minnesota, but we can just we can cry ourselves to sleep.
And at this point, what isn't in Minnesota?
Yeah, come on, Jamie. Easy.
It's a good thing you're nice people down there.
Trades like that. There's not very many win-win trades like that you see happen in the NFL like that, where both teams have to be feeling pretty good about it. You know,
right? Exactly.
I mean, I'd like to have both, but you know,
yeah. Right, but they never would have taken Jefferson if they still had.
No, yeah, exactly.
So it's like that window would have never opened for sure.
Right.
One thing I think about, or try to think about a lot is, correlation plays and lineups. And, for me, it's easier to do like in the first week. It's a little bit tougher to try to guess your way through. I mean, I definitely look at it, but, I try to take a look at like, okay, if these two teams are playing each other, what's the likely path to victory for the team that I'm picking to advance? And what does that say about who might perform well on the other team, right? Because in this first round, we can only we can hard fade 2 teams and just not include them at all, right? And then we can soft fade 2 teams with a defense and a kicker, but then there's still going to be 2 teams from the first round that we got to pick, a position player for, right? So we got to think about how are we going to pick those position players? Probably an easy example is, if you've got Derrick Henry running wild over the Ravens like he did last year, look at what that did to Lamar's game. So if you've got Derrick Henry, you should probably just go ahead and cross off, Lamar Jackson, for a couple of reasons. Even if you think that, Henry's the right play or whatever, and that pretty much tells you, number one, well, you think Jackson's one and done, so you don't want him for your quarterback. But if you're worried about any of that kind of stuff, you want to take advantage of good correlations or bad correlations and figure out like New Orleans, Chicago. How is New Orleans likely to beat Chicago? I think it's more than likely going to be more a little bit through the air than on the ground. And you got to figure out, that becomes kind of a tough deal because, Breeze is going to be hard for me to roster in this contest. I don't know about you guys, but
yeah, I'm out.
Yeah. Jason Phillips, and then the rest of their passing game is so fuzzed out, it's like, okay, well, I think New Orleans probably going to win this game, but, how do I really, pick a player from New Orleans, or how do
I think Lamar. Well, I think just the Titans Ravens is, that cuts both ways. I think that's really interesting and kind of it's really a hard one to figure out. If you've got the Titans losing, I mean, King Henry could be bad shock. He could be real bad shock, and he's going to be heavy owned. So what's the likelihood of A.J. Brown or Corey Davis outscoring Henry in a one-and-done scenario? It's definitely better than what the ownership will be. But could the Titans lose, and can Henry still be the highest-scoring Titan? Sure, easily. Likely. It's still probably the most likely outcome that Henry is the highest-scoring Titan, even if they lose. If they get blown out, that's going to be tough. Can that happen? The Ravens are rounding into form. They look good. They look like a different team from a month ago. So that's a tough one. But I definitely look at that. And then I look at if you have the Ravens going deep as well. Are you afraid to have Michael Thomas or Devontae Adams seeing Marlon on the other side? You're not terrified, but is it ideal? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you can, again, without giving out everything, I think you can look at, say, if you're going to roster Lamar, you might want to be looking at those running backs. You're probably going to want Kamara and maybe Aaron Jones. So that's something I would look at.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's a good example of being able to pull a correlation from even deeper down into the playoffs. Like when you've picked your Super Bowl teams. Okay, well, what's my correlation here? and then you can kind of run it back to the first round.
Yep.
So I know we've talked about this a lot. I mean, whether you're, especially if you're entering less teams, you want to differentiate, right? Like you talked about. Is there something that you're starting off at when you're looking at ways to differentiate your team? Like like I said, we talked about some, but is there like a place that people can mostly start? Is it you doing your bracket and differentiating there, or is it the individual players that?
Well, if you've got if your bracket looks different than what you expect other people's brackets to look, then you're already ahead of the game as far as differentiating. You're naturally going to be picking players from teams that are going to have lower ownership. So if your bracket is chalk, and my bracket looks pretty chalky right now. I mean, for the most part, to be honest, then I think you do have to start digging a little bit deeper and finding different areas to pivot. The biggest thing is just figuring out how many of those pivots, what's the magic recipe? You probably need to move off of 3, 4, 5 heavily owned guys, but how many teams are you building? You can't roster, you can't have all the Deontay Johnson decide, well, maybe I'm wrong about that. I want to own some Juju and fire up another X number of teams. It's just like,
awesome. Stop telling them my secrets, man.
Yeah.
and right now,
it's not going to work. Like, that's a minus EV thing to be doing. So, last year for us, it was, 4 or 5 pivots, and you fade the aside from Hopkins. It was the next, and we had Hopkins and Henry, and that was it as far as, the heavily owned guys. And the next 5 guys in ownership, some of those were more heavily owned. Hopkins was close to 50%. I think Henry was like 35%. But you had Michael Thomas he was over 60%. Kittle over 70%. So you got to move off of a few of those guys. You can't just think you're going to send in a chalky lineup with one little pivot and that's going to get it done. I mean, could it happen? Sure. How likely is it? Not very likely you're going to win it without chopping, right? So, and you got to use 3 or 4 good pivots.
Any way to use position to differentiate? Let's say because of the tight ends. No, you don't want to get too crazy with tight ends, right?
Not especially with the extra 2 flex spots.
Okay.
Like last year, you looked at it. We had 3 running backs, 3 receivers, and a tight end. You had a lot of people that were really getting cute, wanting to do the 3 tight ends, or I got to have 4 running backs. I got to have 4 receivers. We didn't really look at it like that. We just kind of pick the best players. It sounds really easy, right?
I remember looking last time you came on. I remember looking at your roster and saying to Dan, this is like so obvious. Like it's so obvious that he won. How did we not think of this?
Move off of MT for Kamara and move off of Aaron Jones for Adams. I mean, it's easy game.
Yeah.
But yeah, but now you add in 2 extra flex spots, and there's like no, I mean, if you're a wide receiver guy, and I think generally wide receivers have the more explosive, higher ceiling, just in a general sense, other than the true bell cow running backs, right? You've got those running backs that get the receptions and they get the heavy workload. And when they exist, it's ideal, but it's just so rare to see it. And then game script can take control of that as well. So I think just in a general sense, the receivers have the more explosive potential. So you're probably best served using receivers, but there's no hard and fast rule as far as how we build the teams.
Where do you guys think game script fits before or after you start looking at the individual players? Just thinking like if you're in a situation where you don't think they're going to be running the ball much, but the strength of that team is the running back. Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, yeah, I think you can easily just point right back to the Titans, Ravens. That's probably, it's really one of the hardest decisions to make, I think, in the tournament. I mean, we built, we've got a lot of Henry, but I'm having second thoughts about putting Henry on teams with Lamar, and I've done it, but I definitely have some reservations about it. You can you can definitely see how that could get away from the Titans. If things get ugly quickly, that's going to be a tough setup. So yeah, I mean, I look at it depending on the teams.
Dan, I've picked the brain. I'm like, I've got all my tools out. I've got nothing left here. What do you have, brother?
Well, I think, we've covered a lot of stuff. And one of the things that we were just talking about differentiating lineups, one of the things to keep in mind is if you have, like even 5% owned players, the odds are there's only going to be like 2 or 3 people in the tourney who have those same 2 players, right? So if you have, even one more player who's down around 10%, your odds of having a unique lineup then go up even more. By that time you're probably at a unique lineup. So you can definitely afford to eat some chalk. And I think, that Austin's definitely said that, you don't want to get too cute and be, going with all, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10% owned players and not have any chalk. Because a lot of times those chalky guys are chalky for a reason. I mean, they score lots of points. And if you can pick the right guy, it's worthwhile. I think that, would you say, Austin, that the chalk you want to fade is more going to be like from teams you expect to lose? You probably don't want to take chalky players from those teams because you're going to have a lot of company on those players.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You can look at how those games are likely to play out and kind of arrive at some conclusions. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to be. That's the struggle with Henry. Like, he can go ballistic. He can go absolutely ballistic, and you're drawing dead without him. Right. Or if that game gets away from him, you could be dead with him. So it's tough. I don't know if there's a real, characteristic or certain thing I'm looking for there. It's just, you got to find a couple spots to pivot. And, if those, like you said, or if you find those sub 10% owned guys, you don't have to get too crazy with the rest. I mean, I don't know what a good example of that might be. Maybe you fire up Robert Tonyan and Corey Davis. Like, you probably go full chalk the rest of the way with those 2 in your lineup. Something like that. I don't think you probably need to get too crazy with the rest of it if you have that. But otherwise, if you're eating a lot of chalk, that changes things.
Yep, for sure.
It's kind of like the more chalk you're putting in, the more obscure you want to go at the other positions. I don't know if I really did that quite correctly. Like, if you have to balance. I mean, you have to balance it. Anytime anyone that's built a DFS lineup, especially, it's very similar to DFS and MTT versus.
You got to find a couple spots, or if you're generally chalky, you have to, you don't have to go super obscure, but you have to differentiate in more spots, right? You need more 20% owned players. If you're going to have, some of those 40-50% plus guys.
Yep, that makes sense.
So this is like totally off strategy. Are you as excited for the tournament now that you've won it? Like, is it now kind of like my chances are winning, or are you still as like, I'm fucking winning this thing, Yeah,
and this is it's a super top heavy contest, so it's super hard to win. We add in 2 flex spots, you add in COVID. It's like, this is a tough contest. It's a really hard contest to win, and there's so many unknowns this year. So am I excited about it? And do I feel like we need to defend the title? Yeah. I feel
nice. I like that he does.
I feel a bit of an obligation. I mean, Abib just did it with football guys. So I guess
unbelievable, eh?
That's right. Crazy. So I guess, it can be done. So I guess we need to step up.
How happy were you, Austin, to see Abib win that thing the second time and know that it's possible to do this twice?
Man, I was grinding all summer in that tournament, so I can't. I'm happy for Abib, but I tweeted out at him earlier. I may not be happy about it, but I respect it.
Right, exactly. But it just kind of shows you could do the same thing. I mean, lightning can strike in the same same place twice. So
yeah, in fairness though, I think doing grinding out the full season long, I think that's more challenging to me. I think that would be a greater accomplishment. I'll toot my own horn if we win it again, but I think the season long
we'll do it for you.
The season long is such a grind. It is. So, it's like a mathematical improbability that could ever happen, and it'll never happen again. But good for him. It's
a bigger Rubik's Cube.
It came out of nowhere to do it too, right?
Yeah,
right.
I mean, so it's just all the more incredible. It's good for the game. I know that. So it's a good story. It's fun. It's good to see.
Yep, for sure.
That luck factor. Dan, anything else before we close this bad boy out?
No, I think I'm pretty much running out of questions. Austin, anything you want to touch on that we haven't hit already?
No, I think you guys squeezed everything out that I was.
He's dry. We squeezed him dry. All right, guys. This
to shut up. I'm giving up too much. So.
No, you know what? I feel like it's one of those things. Like, we talked about some chalk, like Davis, and but at the end of the day, it was more like we always try to take the approach like teaching how to fish. Like just giving you ideas so that you can create your own. Because at the end of the day, let's face it, the winner of this tournament is probably going to be some guys that has an idea, some guy in his room right now thinking up an idea that none of us have of the way this playoff plays out. And that's what you guys did last year. That's how you won it. You had the right chalk. You had the right differentiating pieces. And we kind of gave a really good idea on how to approach, I think, going into especially right now this week as you enter your team. So Dan, look, man, you credit to you. You put together tonight's show sheet, and the questions were just awesome. Anything you want to add or tell Fantasyland before we close this out? We're going to come back next week with some GOAT District action, but just relating this to this, the FFPC and going into the playoff challenge, I'll give you the mic before we close it out.
All right. So, I mean, basically, I think we covered everything. And as JD said, we really are just trying to teach you how to fish. I mean, we know that big $500,000 fish is in the pond that we're all fishing in, right? And somebody is going to come up with it. And what you want to do is you want to be one of the people that's throwing a lure that has a chance, right? And you don't want that lure that some crazy contraption that you put together that no fish will ever bite on. So, tonight's show was really all about how to build that lure and how to get that the right lure into the pond to at least give yourself a chance. And I think we did a good job of that. I think Austin has some awesome insights for us, and just thanks for coming on again, Austin. And anything you wanna shout out or promote, Austin?
No, nothing to promote here. Thanks for having me on again, guys. Appreciate the opportunity. It was good chatting, catching up. Hopefully we'll be back here circling the wagons again in a month, right?
Right.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great, man. It's like Dan said, thanks for coming on. He's at Austin R. Martin 84 on Twitter. Just a good dude to talk to, man. And we appreciate you coming on again. And like Dan said, we'll either have you back to celebrate our victory, hopefully yours. It's either a repeat or maybe the GOATs get a bit of luck going their way. But always a good time, man. You give a lot of tidbits every time you come on that I don't think you can find everywhere. So we appreciate you and we appreciate your time, man.
Appreciate you. Thank you. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, JD.
Guys, we talked about the winners tonight. I'll give a quick repeat. At Slickwick13, you have a 200 entrance into a $500,000 tourney for the FFPC Playoff Challenge. And my boy, Gymnastic at Gold Jacket QBs. So report to the principal's office to get your prize. And again, look, guys, tonight I think was another one thing Dan and I are trying to do in 2021 that we did not do in 2020. Maybe we spread ourselves a bit too thin. Is just to really focus in on things and just give you guys as much information on those things. And tonight was a perfect example of that. We want you to do well in your playoff challenges. Not better than us, Dan and I want to win some cash too. But no, we appreciate you guys tuning in. We appreciate Austin. Dan, you and your slick hair always bring in the juice, and we appreciate that. For those who won prizes, make sure you reach out to us. I'll send a quick tweet tomorrow to remind you. But once you get it, make sure you sign up quick because, guys, if you want to play in this FFPC tournament, it's selling out really quick. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much it, guys. We thank you for sticking with us. Like I said, next week we'll bring the goodness on how we're going to blow out 2021 with the GOAT District and what's new, what's coming. But hopefully you're entering your teams into the FFPC to win yourself some big money. Other options for you, Monkey Night Fight, MyBookie. Use the code GOAT, and you'll get all kinds of goodness when you deposit some money. Good luck in your playoff contests, leagues, whatever it is you're playing in, squares. I don't know what other tournaments they have out there, but we appreciate you listening, and we'll check you all later.
GOAT District, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offer's the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden, they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man. Y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.